Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good day to you all. Today, our speakers will be discussing using federal charging funds equitably and effectively. Our speakers will discuss how considerations to best use federal funding to implement charging infrastructure. My name is Simbiat Yusuf. I am the Member Relations Manager at Fourth. And before I pass it along to our moderator today, Kat Plein, our Director of our Development and Communications Director, I have a few updates from the Fourth team. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. The webinar recording as well as the presentations will be shared with you all after the webinar. So if you miss anything, don't worry, the webinar is recorded and we will send you all of the information as well as some additional resources from our speakers today. For those of you that might be new to Fourth and don't know who we are or what we do, we are Fourth. We are on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together to create solutions for all communities. Our work is focused on four focus areas, which are access to electric cars, access to charging, events and partnerships, policy, and emerging modes. If you would like to learn more about Fourth or look on our website for any studies, any papers that we've published, you can find that information at fourthmobility.org. We will have that link in the webinar recap as well. And the work we do will not be possible without the support of our members and sponsors. We just want to take this moment to thank our members for providing the opportunity to bring these programs to you all. If you are not a member and you're interested in membership, you can reach out to me directly. My email is on the screen, or go on our website again at fourthmobility.org. And just so we've talked about who we are, what we do, our membership, but would you like to join our team at Fourth? We have 3 opportunities, positions currently open. If you would like to join the Fourth team, or you know someone in your network that should be a part of the Fourth team, please connect them. We will share the links to these open positions on our website as well and on the recap. And if you thought you missed the deadline for the call for proposals for the Roadmap Conference, good news. We've extended the deadline to this Friday, November 18th. You have the opportunity to submit your abstract following the themes of the conference. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on my email, or you can reach out at the website roadmap4.org. And now I'll pass it along to our moderator today, Kat. Please turn on your webcam and join me on stage.
Hello, good morning or afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. My name's Kat Plein. I'm the Director of Development and Communications here at Fourth. Will be your moderator today. It's a pleasure to share space with you wherever you may be joining us from. And we'll run through a quick introduction. So folks, as I bring you to the stage, if you could please turn off your webcam. So first, would like to introduce you to Steve Lommele, who's the Interim Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Lead at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Steve leads communications and stakeholder engagement, supports technical assistance and capacity building, and collaborates with internal and external partners on workforce development priorities. He joined the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in 2008 and is a project leader in the Center for Integrated Mobility Sciences. So thanks for joining us, Steve. Next, I'd like to introduce Bridget Gilmore, EV Charging Fellow at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Bridget supports communications and stakeholder engagement at the Joint Office. Previously, she was a senior analyst in the Sustainable Transportation Practice at the Cadmus Group. Welcome, Bridget. And then I'll introduce Geoff Gibson from Fourth. Morning, Geoff. Geoff is a senior program manager here at Fourth. He leads our access to charging team, which oversees programs that tackle complex problems such as multi-unit dwelling charging and workplace charging. Prior to joining us here at Fourth, Geoff worked as a city transportation planner. welcome all. And you'll see also that Alex Schroeder from the Joint Office may be joining us a little bit later in the call. Wanted to make sure you got to see his face on this slide, so if he pops up a few minutes later, it won't be a surprise to anybody. So welcome everyone. We're going to start with an icebreaker to get us into the conversation. So here it goes. What part of the IIJA are you most excited to see come to fruition in 2023? And Geoff, I think I'll pass it to you first.
Oh boy. A bit of feedback. I don't know. Okay, that's better. What part of the IIJ am I most excited to see in 2023? I think this is the year that it's all happening, right? So we had NEVI and the formula funds come through, and sort of the or at least the program come through this year. We should be hearing much more about the community grants program here pretty soon. I think 2023 is when we actually start to see things happen. So I think it's just going to be a very exciting year overall. I'm in particular excited for the community grants program, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But there's going to be a lot, I think, happening. That's just going to be really fun. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Geoff. Steve, I'll pass it to you. And yes, on the note about feedback, I think we fixed it. But Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just really excited to continue the momentum that we've built over the last 8 or so months working with state departments of transportation and their counterparts at state energy offices and engaging with many stakeholders at the local level and with private industry. There's a lot of energy kind of pulling us in the same direction right now to build out a national EV charging network and ensure that those benefits flow to all Americans equitably. So just excited to continue to see that momentum build. I think this is probably the first time, people have been working on EV charging for a long time, but this is the first time where we've got all 50 states plus Puerto Rico and District of Columbia working on a major program at the same time.
Yeah, I think Steve said that super well. I was going to say just seeing all the state plans for the NEVI program is so exciting to actually think about how they will be implemented. And I know that that's definitely where things are now shifting the focus toward implementation. So it'll be really excited to see how kind of words on a page and all this work to engage stakeholders end up seeing the fruition of that.
All right, thanks for that, y'all. So I think at this point, we'll turn it over to the Joint Office, over to Steve and Bridget, just to give us some general context from the Community Grants Program. Over to y'all.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm going to kick us off today. So again, I'm Steve Lommele, and I'm the Interim Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Lead for the Joint Office. I've been with the office since we started, but I come from the National Renewable Energy Lab, where I've worked in the transportation electrification space for a number of years. So Bridget and I are going to start off talking about opportunities to use these federal charging funds equitably and effectively. So we'll provide you with some brief background on the Joint Office, touch on some of our immediate term priorities, and then talk about our general technical assistance philosophy and what resources are available to all of you as you explore the NEVI Formula Program and the upcoming Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program. And then we'll talk about some of our key priorities that are coming up for the Joint Office. So background, probably many of you know this already, but the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation was established under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to address areas of joint interest to the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. So the Joint Office has 9 major areas of emphasis and $300 million in funding to support many of the initiatives that we're working on within the Joint Office, and then of course the major programs like NEVI and community charging and fueling infrastructure program that I'll talk about here in a second. So our 9 major areas of emphasis, first and foremost, for the last year or so, we really have been focused on technical assistance related to NEVI plan development and now moving towards implementation. So we've worked closely with all of the state departments of transportation to help them develop their EV deployment plans. Those were all approved. And states, of course, are now working towards implementation. As we think about building out this national charging network, the data component of that will be pretty significant focus of the Joint Office. So thinking about how charging infrastructure is utilized, what reliability looks like, so we'll be focused on that. And then thinking about kind of a national and regional level, what are the needs with respect to electric vehicle charging and how is that changing with the rollout of this infrastructure? Workforce development is also a significant portion of the Joint Office focus, so thinking about what kind of training and certification is necessary, not only for the installation of charging equipment, but also planning where it goes, thinking about how it's operated and maintained over time. So all of that falls into that training and certification program bucket. And then thinking about more broadly, how does renewable energy generation, storage, and grid integration fit into the build out of this national network? And then moving the electrons from one place to another and thinking about how to effectively do that through transmission pilots and the rights of way. And then broad research strategies and actions to mitigate the effects of climate change. Also thinking about working with utilities and what do streamlined utility accommodations policies look like for transmission and transportation rights of way. And then of course, anything else that's of interest and a priority for the Secretaries of Energy and Transportation. So the Joint Office, again, brings together the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation, and our mission is really focused on accelerating an electrified transportation system that is affordable, convenient, equitable, reliable, and safe. And this hopefully will result in a vision in a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. So with respect to our immediate term priorities, as I mentioned, the Joint Office has provided unifying guidance, technical assistance, and analysis to support 4 major programs. And the one that we've been most focused on here for the last 6 to 8 months has been the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. So that's $5 billion that goes to state departments of transportation to build out a national electric vehicle charging network along designated electric vehicle charging corridors. Coming up here this calendar year, we expect there to be a notice of funding opportunity announced for the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. So that's another $2.5 billion in community and corridor grants for EV charging, as well as hydrogen, natural gas, and propane fueling infrastructure. Half of that is focused on corridors, and the other half it will be focused on communities. And then the Joint Office is also working with the U.S. Department of Transportation on the Low No Emission Grants Program for transit. And so this is $5.6 billion to support the deployment of low and no emission transit buses. And then the Clean School Bus Program through EPA. So that's another $5 billion to support the electric school bus deployments around the country. And the first round of those were just announced in the last month. And so with all of these programs, the Joint Office is sort of your front door to these programs. We have technical assistance available that Bridget's going to talk about later on, but we can help connect you with the guidance and other resources to help you tap into these programs and support that vision where everyone can ride and drive electric. So the NEVI Formula program, as I mentioned, is $5 billion for EV corridors, and this is building out infrastructure along EV corridors. Any EV charging infrastructure acquired or installed along as part of the program has to be along a designated electric vehicle charging corridor, and states were required to develop EV infrastructure deployment plans. So as I mentioned, all of those plans for the first year have been approved. Those are posted on driveelectric.gov. And states are very quickly moving towards implementation and build out of charging infrastructure. The bill also sets aside 10% of EV formula funding for grants. So the Joint Office will be working to kind of fill in gaps as infrastructure is deployed. And then probably the topic that's of most interest to all of you, and kind of one of the points of discussion for today's call, is the discretionary grant program for charging and fueling infrastructure. So this is outlined in the bipartisan infrastructure law, but the notice of funding opportunity will be announced this calendar year. And this is for EV charging, hydrogen, propane, and natural gas fueling infrastructure. So as I mentioned, it's divided into 2 distinct buckets. Half of it is for corridor charging. So this again will be looking at strategically deploying publicly accessible charging infrastructure and other alternative fueling infrastructure along designated alternative fuel corridors. And then the other aspect is community charging grant programs. So this program will strategically deploy EV infrastructure as well as those other alternative fueling infrastructure in communities. And the goal really is to build a national network for EV charging. Each state has an individual state EV deployment plan, but we've been convening the states regionally so that they can talk to their peers about how these corridors connect to their neighbors. And there's a lot of collaboration happening regionally and nationally. We're also working closely with NASIO and AASHTO, who are helping us convene state DOTs and state energy offices to look for opportunities for continued collaboration so we can build out this national network that'll benefit all Americans. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget, who's going to talk a little bit about our technical assistance and some other aspects of the Joint Office.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. And yeah, I will now talk a little bit about technical assistance opportunities and how to get involved with the work that the Joint Office is doing in terms of supplying technical assistance. And first, I'll start off with the Joint Office principles and the approach. So the Joint Office is really taking a big tent approach. We are in our nature a joint effort and deeply believe in the respectful collaboration with EV charging experts who preceded the establishment of the office to really ensure that we can accomplish this shared vision of creating a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. So our technical assistance will ultimately look to dive into hard challenges alongside partners and states to create something revolutionary, help states build on successes, learn from challenges, leverage the experience of those with more mature charging networks, and really utilize the people, programs, and relationships that came before us to empower future charging experts. So the hub for finding technical assistance is really our website, driveelectric.gov. This is a website to connect stakeholders to technical assistance resources, including program guidance. We have a concierge service where you can reach out with technical assistance questions, and you can hope to hear back from someone really shortly. And we also have supporting data and tools all collated into one place. I wanted to provide some specific places to check out on driveelectric.gov, specifically state planning websites. So now that all 52 plans, 50 states and DC and Puerto Rico state plans for the NEVI program have been certified, they're all housed on driveelectric.gov. So you can go to technical assistance and see the state plan. And you can also see the state NEVI planning website. So this can be a really great resource to see if there are potentially RFIs and RFPs that are becoming available. So definitely recommend checking out your state's NEVI plan and state planning website. There are ultimately 75,000 miles of designated alternative fuel corridors, and many of these will be passing through communities. And as you think toward leveraging other programs, it's going to be great to understand the full context and also understand the stakeholder engagement approach for that state NEVI plan. Additionally, there's also more resources on technical assistance. This is where you can find information on program guidance, the notice of proposed rulemaking information, frequently asked questions, as well as find some more information on transit and school bus technical assistance, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So in terms of transit vehicle technical assistance, NREL, the Joint Office, are partnering with FTA to offer technical assistance for eligible transit agencies to plan for and deploy clean school buses. So this is at driveelectric.gov/transit. We also are providing technical assistance for school buses. So NREL, the Joint Office, and DOE are partnering with US EPA to provide direct technical assistance for eligible school bus fleets to plan for and deploy clean school buses. And really just wanted to note that these questions can range from things that are relatively simple, like how to get in contact with your electric utility, to things that might be more challenging in terms of if you're facing some sort of challenge with your actual deployment process. So feel free to reach out and ask us some questions. In terms of equity and Justice 40, wanted to highlight that there's two pieces of guidance that are currently available: the Justice 40 interim guidance from the White House, as well as guidance to states in the NEVI program to think about how Justice 40 is being considered with the NEVI implementation. Additionally, really wanted to point out a great tool. This is the Electric Vehicle Charging Justice 40 map, and this was developed by Argonne National Labs. So you can access this map from driveelectric.gov, and there's a web-based version. You can toggle into your community, see the disadvantaged community mapping, understand where public charging is currently sited, and see where designated alternative fuel corridors are located. Also wanted to highlight some other resources that might be useful. DOT has developed a Rural EV Infrastructure Toolkit, which has great information, including basics, benefits in a rural context and challenges, partnership opportunities, planning, and funding. There's actually a funding matrix that spans about 11 pages of the Rural EV infrastructure toolkit that is organized by the agency and program name, program description, eligible parties, and the type of project that would be eligible. And this is actually being updated. So the planned update is for late 2022 with expanded content on transit and school bus electrification, micromobility, accessible design. And then there's also going to be a companion urban toolkit that's to come in winter of 2023 to be reframed for more of an urban suburban context, similar structure, but have some topic areas that might be pertinent, like multifamily housing and building codes, curbside charging, and fleet charging. So this is a great resource that we wanted to highlight. And then I know lots of questions coming in on what's next for the joint office. There's a lot that we're working on concurrently. So FHWA and the joint office are looking to expeditiously finalize the notice of proposed rulemaking. Additionally, looking to provide policy solutions for the Buy America waiver, desire to finalize this as well as soon as possible. As Steve mentioned, the discretionary charging and fueling infrastructure grant program, FHWA and joint office are working on the notice of funding opportunity and looking to have that out by the end of the calendar year. There's also the 10% set aside for NEVI funds. So these are going to be grants to states and local governments that require additional assistance to strategically deploy EV charging infrastructure. There will also be the designation of freight corridors. So that's something to come from FHWA. There will be round 7 of alternative fuel designation. So if you see that your state NEVI plan, there's a major corridor that you would feel would be a good candidate for an alternative fuel corridor, there will be another round and request for nominations. As we have mentioned, we are really focusing our attention toward implementation and expanding our activities to address that issues that might crop up, such as permitting, utility issues, siting, right-sizing of stations, future-proofing, and things of that nature. As Steve mentioned, we have an MOU between NASIO and AASHTO, so this will also help to support our implementation process and with additional technical assistance. This partnership launched on September 7th, and this year we will be convening states regionally and nationally to ensure that these investments are really well coordinated. There's also the electric vehicle working group. So we are looking to convene this working group, Federal Advisory Committee, as outlined in the bill. And this group will include members from the EV industry, EVSE providers, utilities, fleets, state transportation and energy agencies, local and tribal governments, and so on. And just ultimately wanted to close on our contact form. So please do reach out to the joint office with any questions that you might have. We definitely welcome your feedback. And if you do have specific technical assistance questions related to low-no emissions for the transit vehicles or a clean school bus program, please do feel free to reach out. We're looking to support eligible entities. And thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing from Geoff about how Forth will be looking to support communities engaging with the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grants Program.
Thanks, Bridget. It's a great segue too around questions and getting in contact with the joint office. If you do have direct questions, please continue to submit those to the attendee chat. We're getting quite a few. We'll do our best to get out to as many as we can in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I want to pass it over to my colleague, Geoff Gibson, who's going to be talking a little bit about Forth's work in this space.
Great. Thanks, Kat. I will try and keep this relatively quick because I do see all the questions that are flooding in, and I know a lot of people have questions that we want to get to. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what we're doing here at Forth, and I just want to highlight that everything I'm going to be talking about today is sort of brought to us by the GM Climate Equity Fund, as they have invested in us to help invest in communities through our program here today. So we're very thankful for them because they're enabling us to do some really cool stuff. So I always like to first ground us a little bit in sort of what's happening and sort of how this money is going to be played out. So we know that there's $7.5 billion over 5 years for EV charging infrastructure. But we also know that $87 billion is sort of needed, including $39 billion for publicly accessible charging. And we know that up to 25% of drivers are estimated to rely entirely on public charging infrastructure. So that is a large amount of people that will be very dependent on sort of what we're all talking about here today. And so when we're starting to think about that 25% in particular, we need to start thinking about equity and sort of why, right? So drivers are easily excluded from sort of a lot of the charging infrastructure that exists today, right? So if we think about charging infrastructure that typically goes into homes, for example, well, drivers who typically live in apartment complexes aren't really involved in those conversations. They aren't really able to access that charging infrastructure. More to that point, low-income drivers in BIPOC communities generally are not at the cutting edge of buying very expensive cars and having single-family homes, and so therefore the large disproportionate amount of those communities are excluded as well. So we need to start thinking about how we can get access to this technology and all this money to those communities. And we have to be very thoughtful and intentional about how we're doing this. And again, I just like to use this graphic. And those of you who have seen a presentation by me have probably seen me talk about this graphic before. But when we're talking about accessing charging infrastructure, we're really talking about equity in charging infrastructure. And that does not mean equality in charging infrastructure. We can make sure that charging infrastructure goes into every single community. However, at best, if we're dropping that charging infrastructure into a low-income community, at best, nobody's going to use it. And at worst, it's going to actively cause displacement of those same communities that we want to enable and we want to help get access to clean and electrified transportation. So again, equality does not equal equity. We want to be super clear on that. So I'm just going to run through a few really quick use cases before we get into some of the stuff that we're doing here at Fourth, just to highlight some of the communities that we're talking about today. And so that would be apartments, taxi and gig drivers, and then rural communities. So in terms of apartment charging, we really start to think about how to build out an equity program to include things such as car share programs around affordable housing, right? So here at Fourth, we have a number of programs that do car share programs, and pairing that up with an affordable housing complex really allows people not only to have access to the charging infrastructure and access to the electric vehicle, but also builds their collective intelligence and knowledge around charging infrastructure and electric vehicles. Because I think a lot of those of us who are in this industry can often overlook the fact that this new technology is pretty intimidating for a large part of the population, especially charging infrastructure. There's lots of different companies out there. There's lots of different new terms, kilowatt hours, all that kind of stuff that people just don't really have a good handle on the same way they do traditional, gasoline infrastructure, for example. There's also some other things to do here. I think the most important one is to just ensure there's affordable charging rates at publicly accessible DC fast charging stations. So there's a lot of ways that we can go about that. There's a bigger, deeper conversation in that, but just to move this along, I won't go too far into it. We also want to think about taxi and gig driver charging, right? So taxi and gig drivers, that's proportionally lower income and people of color who have to use services such as Uber and Lyft to subsidize their income. And we also know that these drivers use their vehicles differently, right? They use it a lot more heavily than most. And so how can we enable fast charging solutions to target and help these drivers so that they can charge their vehicles quickly, efficiently, and get back on the road so that they can continue doing what they do best, which is help a lot of people get around their respective cities, but do it in an affordable way and with vehicles that require less maintenance overall, right? So fast charging solutions can absolutely be an enabling technology in this for this community. And of course, rural area charging. This is a specific emphasis that we're looking at here at Fourth, because again, I think it's really easy for publicly accessible charging, DC fast charging stations to be prioritized at park trailheads, for example, or national park trailheads. However, who is that really enabling, right? That's probably mostly enabling passerbys, travelers, tourists. Whereas if you put it somewhere within a community, maybe that's nearby, maybe it's a few miles away, you can also ensure that charging infrastructure works for that community. It works for the people who live there, the people who work there, the employees who maybe work at some of the lodgings or the services they're providing to the tourist population. So really thinking about rural charging not as a way to enable travelers or people who are just coming to visit, but really enabling people who live out there. And it's worth pointing out that we want rural communities to be on our side. We want them to see the value in transportation electrification because there's a lot of value in there for them. And right now, if this charging infrastructure isn't being prioritized for them, they aren't really going to see the value in it, and that's going to disproportionately have a lot more charging infrastructure go to urban areas. And so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of what we're going to offer here at Fourth to help all of you get access to some of this money. So the first thing I want to highlight is that we do have a website. So if you go to fourthmobility.org/federal charging support, you can find sort of how we are organizing our information, sort of what we are planning to do around this federal money that's coming down the pipeline. And more to that point, we have a contact form here that you can fill out and sort of put in your information, your name, as well as a description of your program idea. That way we can start tracking who's interested in doing what, and we can start reaching out with sort of the resources that we have available. And this will become more important as I go through some of our other tools. And I will be coming back to this page before I close out. So you don't need to write it down just yet. So the first thing that we are doing, again, with the help of GM, is we are writing what we're calling grant templates. And so this is largely to help you get access to this competitive grant money that's coming out later this year or early next year. And really, these grant templates will be made entirely free of charge. They will be unbranded. The goal is that you can go to the website, download sort of a template, and you have what is essentially an 80%, quote unquote, of the way complete grant. And of course, 80% is not a hard amount. It's going to depend on the program. It's going to depend on what you want to do and sort of how you want to do it. However, it should help communities really get access to some of this money if they don't have grant writing teams. I'm based here in Portland. Portland has some very wonderful people who are focused on transportation electrification. If I go to a city that's outside of Portland, even a suburban city of Portland, they do not have the same resources, right? And certainly not if you go to a smaller city of 10,000 people. They're probably going to have, a couple planners maybe on staff, and they're probably going to be very busy with their own city. So having this tool will really help enable those communities get over a really big hump in that first sort of effort to get access to this money. A quick caveat here, though, is that these grant templates will be centered and focused on equitable programs to ensure people have access to charging infrastructure, right? So how are we, I guess we are focusing these on programs that will help people who live in apartments, for example, use charging infrastructure. And that's going to include a lot of sort of extra bells and whistles. And that sort of leads us into the next slide here, which is grant writing support. So again, as part of GM, Fourth will be working with select partners to write their grants for them. We've been funded to essentially write 10 communities / cities grants that have a vested interest in equitable charging programs and infrastructure. And really, we're going to work hand in hand with these communities to identify the program elements and the partners and where additional funding could potentially come from to really build out programs that we think are going to be very successful. The goal being that we want programs to be able to use this money that are going to highlight just what good it can do. So more information about this process is coming soon. But interested parties can go back to that form on our website, which we'll get to, I'll show again in a minute here, and fill out the form. If you have something that you're already thinking of, we would love to hear it. Due to the tight timelines, we're still figuring out exactly how this is going to roll out. I can tell you that there's not going to be any sort of formal RFP process. And finally, again, as part of this program, we are developing an online learning portal for communities that really don't know that much about charging infrastructure, right? They don't know sort of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to have charging infrastructure, build it out. And more critically, they don't really understand what it means to have a good charging program or charging infrastructure that's really going to help their communities. So we are working to develop an online learning platform that will really answer a lot of these key fundamental questions and really help people who are starting at zero or very low amount of knowledge around this infrastructure, get them up to a baseline where they feel like they can start making some educated decisions. And that will roll out early next year. This will be free for city, state, county, and MPO staff. And it will also be free for community-based organizations. However, we have a very limited number of licenses available because of just sort of the system we're using. And licenses are good for 2 months. So essentially, we are going to start taking names of people who are interested in having access to this program and build sort of a waiting list. So this program will be initially available for 1 year, but depending on how popular or successful it is, we will definitely continue it after that. So, and I did just see this. MPO stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization. So once again, go to our website, fourthmobility.org/federal charging support. And if you're interested, fill out this form. It's sort of near the bottom of the page, just to start sending us your ideas and getting sort of on our list of who to contact as soon as we know more information about the community grant program and our templates, where we will make sure that you know that same information. And just to conclude, large public investments in charging infrastructure can disrupt historic patterns of inequality, but only if they are implemented with thoughtful intention. Otherwise, electrification of transportation can cause further harm, as a lot of transportation investments have in the past. So, thank you.
Thanks, Geoff, for that. Thanks for the powerful close. And also really excited to see what comes out of the learning portal. Please, folks, if you have ideas in communities that might want to get engaged, please direct them to our site as well. All right, if I could get everyone to turn their webcams on. We have entered the Q&A section, and our participants have given us quite a lot to chew on. So we will do our best to get through as many of these as possible. I'm going to go through them in sequential order, folks, on the call. So starting off with the first question, when will the NEVI regulations be finalized?
Yes, this is a good question. And all I can really say is that FHWA and the Joint Office are working expeditiously to finalize the final proposed rule. And yeah, we're working on it.
For that. Second question, how is the Joint Office thinking about how to support charge point operators who are emerging in the space, who are more local and regionally focused?
Yeah, this is a great question. And in both the NEVI program and the community and community and corridor discretionary grant program, there's going to be an 80-20 federal cost share. So this is a great way to look at the state NEVI plans and also think about how the states are approaching this cost sharing. I think it's definitely state specific and context specific, but you see that there's definitely a lot of partnerships happening there. And I think being a local regional charge point operator, working with where you are regionally makes sense. And there's been some interesting proposals in the state NEVI plans to basically utilize the cost share where states are considering putting projects together in batches. So if there are low utilization charging stations, providing more federal cost share. And then if there are locations where, the chargers are probably going to be used quite often, then you can use a little bit less of that cost sharing. So I think there are great opportunities to learn from the NEVI program and how states are approaching that.
Great, thank you for that. Question number 3, and I do know Alex has also joined us, so Alex, feel free to pipe in if your audio is on.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, are you here with us, Alex?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Welcome.
And my webcam is just not cooperating today, so I'll spare you the visual impact and just here to jump in on any of the Q&A. But great discussion so far.
Great. Welcome to the chat, Alex. Next question. Will locations selected for the community charging grant program still need to be located along or near alternative fuel designated corridors?
Yes, so basically the discretionary grant program is divided into 2 distinct $1.25 billion grant programs. So The corridor charging program will strategically deploy publicly accessible EV charging along the designated alternative fuel corridors. But the community charging program is designed to be publicly accessible along schools and parks and publicly accessible locations like that. So definitely looking to see how it can really serve the public and serve disadvantaged communities.
Hearing no additional comment, go on to the next one. Y'all have offered a lot of comments, so thank you so much to our participants for really lively participation today. Question number 4 is a more localized to a use case in Colorado, but could be used for many states. As part of the technical assistance for electric school buses, or there, oops, and I lost it because there's things firing up in the chat. Let me go right back up. Will there be an opportunity available to help school districts with right-sizing infrastructure? There's significant concern here in Colorado about heating buses in cold weather, resulting in districts pushing for DCFC when high-powered level 2 would otherwise be appropriate in most situations.
Yeah, that's a great technical question, and definitely one that sounds very eligible for reaching out to our experts through our Clean School Bus technical assistance. So definitely send us those questions, send the questions that you have, whether it's on vehicles, infrastructure, any sort of technological challenges, working with your utility, route analysis, things to that extent. If you send a note through the contact form and do Clean School Bus technical assistance, then I'm sure they'll get a very comprehensive answer, and one that is more than I can probably supply right now.
Yeah, it's a great note as well. I know we will be sending out all the links provided in the presentation as well, y'all. So I will close with this. If you have questions that we can't get to, please be sure to use those links to submit additional questions. All right, moving right along. Can you tell us when round 7 for AFCs will be?
Yes. So for the call for nominations, this is a process that happens annually. So the last one was in February, and we expect that nominations will follow a similar schedule. So I'd be on the lookout. And I don't know if we had said this actually earlier in the presentation, but on driveelectric.gov, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and that's where we post upcoming announcements. So that would be one that we would let people know when the request for nominations is available. So great way to stay in touch with what the recent updates are.
Yeah, and I feel like this next one is a segue to what you just said as well. A nice parallel, but as a supplier in EV charging station for their components needs, where can I go to find specifics on qualifying into the Buy America initiative?
Yes, so that's a great question, and definitely we are currently working with FHWA on policy solutions in relation to the responses from the public on the Buy America waiver. So that would be something to stay tuned for, and subscribe to the newsletter, and that's where you can find updates when more specifics are available.
Next question, can EV States Clearinghouse be made available to MPOs? Thanks, Geoff, by the way, for answering that question on the fly during the presentation. In addition to statewide agencies, we haven't been able to sign up for access.
Oh, this is a great question, and this is maybe one I would defer to Alex. I don't know necessarily as much on the ins and outs of the clearinghouse. Do you have any insights, Alex, if MPOs could be added?
So I think it's a really good question. This is administered now by NASIO, which is the National Association of State Energy Officials, and it actually predated the Joint Office. So I think that's something we could certainly run past them. I know there is some sensitivity, and that's why it's password protected. There are procurement documents and other things that are shared. So I think that's something maybe we can flag for a future conversation. It's a really good question, especially as we think about expanding into community charging.
Thank you.
Great. Up a bit. They're coming in just as fast as my screen will take them. All right, let's see here. Hold on one second. If we could pause adding these to our chat, that'd be great for just a second. All right, for community grants, could you talk a bit about the Joint Office's interest relative to the existing multifamily charging market? Is it interested in funding on-site charging for multifamily housing, or will it fund only charging that is proximally located to multifamily housing properties? Is there a minimum power level that the Joint Office will fund? Is assigned level 1 eligible? And thank you.
Yeah, these are great questions, and this is definitely what's being discussed and will be outlined in the pending NOFO. I would say that in the bill language, there is language around basically wanting to have eligible entities receive a grant that can also include fueling infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles and in proximity to intermodal transfer stations. So I think it'll be a variety of different types of charging, but this is definitely being discussed and we'll have more information soon.
Bridget, I could maybe just add quickly. It seems like the threshold question is, does this need to be, can this be on site or in proximity to site? And so I think some of this is going to be in the legislation. I think the key thing maybe to provide for context and what we do know is this is funding publicly accessible charging stations, right? So I think some of that's going to be up to the multifamily dwelling and whether or not they want to, kind of what access looks like. But it's to Bridget's point, I think it's something that you'll see in more detail with the program, but there are just some foundational provisions in the infrastructure bill that might also help inform the answer to that question.
Great, thanks for that, Alex. All right, next question. Given that NEVI formula funds are required to be used less than 1 mile from the AFC, how does that fit with equity when people don't live near them?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think I had mentioned this, but there are 75,000 miles of EV charging corridors that were designated as of July of this year. And definitely while these are highway corridors, they pass through communities and urban areas and will serve the charging needs of those on long distance trips. This is definitely a challenge that people highlight is with their electric vehicles of not necessarily having charging readily accessible for long distance trips, as well as those making regional or local trips. And in many areas, the corridors do also provide access to disadvantaged communities per the EV Charging Justice 40 map that I talked about. And our country is very geographically diverse, so we're looking to build a truly national EV charging network that can cover the entirety of the system for urban, suburban, and rural communities. So definitely the NEVI program is one piece of the puzzle, but definitely think of these programs as being complementary with the discretionary grant program, looking to fill in some of these gaps along corridors, but also looking to provide charging specifically to communities and specifically those that are underserved and overburdened.
And the only thing I would add to that is the corridors are fairly wide. And I think it's pretty easy to, for example, place charging for the NEVI program at a rest stop. But a lot of times there are communities that are within sort of that corridor buffer that should be, maybe looked at as an alternative. So if you're able to get drivers to go a little bit out of their way to enable a community that's nearby, that would go a lot more. That'd be a lot better than just putting it right off the highway.
And then I'd also just say that every NEVI state plan does include an equity section. So if you are interested to think about how the state is incorporating equity, that's another great place to look.
All right, I see a couple questions here that I think we've answered, so I'm going to keep going. Where there'll be education of taxi and gig drivers about how to not wreck your battery by relying only or mostly on fast charging versus just supplementing level 1 and level 2 charging. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it sounds like a good question for the fourth folks. Is this something that you all are?
I think so. Geoff, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to have a good question. We have a lot of people here at Fourth who think a lot about the taxi and gig driver work charging sort of space and how charging and electric vehicles can really suit what they're doing. And I know there's a lot of people in outside the country or within specific parts of the country that are thinking a lot about this as well through things like wireless charging and sort of how that interacts with car batteries. I think right now we're at the place where we just need to ensure that this population has equitable access to charging. And then we can also start to think about the technology and how it might not degrade certain parts of a vehicle if they have to fully rely on DC fast charging, for example.
Thanks, Geoff. This next question is actually a question we had too, so I'm going to ask it on 2 levels. Only government agencies can currently apply for these grants. So what do you do if you're a community-based org or an NGO and you want to get involved? How would you engage in the process?
Yeah, this is a great question, and definitely want to really stress that partnerships are very key in this grant program, and interested parties should begin to partner and talk with eligible entities early in the process. So the eligible entities will include state or political subdivisions of a state, MPOs, local governments, special purpose districts, or public authorities with a transportation function, including a port authority, Indian tribe, U.S. territory, state, or local authority with ownership of publicly accessible transportation facilities. So definitely reach out to these eligible entities and make your needs known. Particularly another person or another organization to make your needs known to is your U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities Coalition in your state, and also your State Department of Transportation. All the NEVI plans, I think I'd mentioned this, have a stakeholder engagement basis and should have avenues for engaging stakeholders in the state. So make your needs known and let them also know how you might be able to fill in some challenges that they might have highlighted. That's also part of the NEVI plans, is highlighting specific challenges that states might be facing in the implementation process. And eligible entities then could contract with these community-based organizations. And additionally, the Joint Office may also release funding opportunities in the future, which may be an opportunity for community-based organizations to participate.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, or I guess maybe just emphasize, if you're a community-based organization, while you might not be the organization that actually submits the grant, my perspective here at Fourth is that you are the organization that should be leading sort of the ideation around where charging infrastructure can best help your community, and really starting those partnerships with your local cities or counties or what have you, eligible grant submitter, because I think you're going to have that intrinsic knowledge of how to ensure that this technology is actually used. And more to that point, a lot of cities aren't going to have the capacity to lead this themselves, right? Again, if we're thinking to those cities that we're really interested in, those 10,000, 15,000 person cities, again, they might have one or two city planners on staff, but they have a whole city to manage. And transportation electrification is probably pretty far down their list of priorities. So having an organization like yours lead the effort will go a long way.
Maybe this is Alex, just would add quickly to this. I know we're talking a lot about the programs in the infrastructure bill and the $7.5 billion, but I do want to point out that there are other federal programs that maybe provide more direct support. The Vehicle Technologies Office had a funding announcement that specifically funds community engagement and other things. And so I can appreciate that's where a lot of the attention is, but there is a kind of a broader ecosystem of these opportunities. And I just want to make sure everyone is on the lookout for those as well.
Thanks, Alex. All right, I think we've got time for one more. So I'm going to close it out about how is the Joint Office thinking about different vehicle types like medium and heavy duty and micromobility, and how is that being considered as components of the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think definitely we're very interested in making sure that this is part of the entire transportation electrification process and wanting to make sure that nothing happens in a silo. So wanted to clarify also that the NEVI program doesn't specify what type of vehicle can use the charging infrastructure. So any vehicle is welcome to use the chargers that are available. And really what is proposed is a minimum standard. So currently it's 150 kilowatt chargers that could be used for medium and heavy duty vehicle charging on long distance trips and regional trips, that type of thing. And then in terms of the community and discretionary grant program, right now in the bill language, there is some text that talks about considering the extent to which the application is deploying charging infrastructure, or hydrogen fueling infrastructure, or propane fueling infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And the propane applications is specifically for fueling medium and heavy duty vehicles. And then also thinking about how this charging or fueling infrastructure is located in terms of being proximate to intermodal transfer stations. So really wanting to think about, how our applicants related to the overall transportation system and knowing that this is one piece of the puzzle. Also, like Alex was saying, there are many other funding opportunities. So we want to make sure as the joint office, we are really working jointly across these opportunities and thinking about kind of the whole transition that is happening.
All right, I apologize, folks. We could not get to all the questions. Really sincerely appreciate the lively participation from folks in the chat. Again, if you do have additional questions, please do submit them via the links we'll be sending out that Bridget had shared earlier for the joint office. And if you're interested in getting involved with Fourth Community Grant Program, please reach out to us via our website. And just a hearty thank you to all. I will turn it over to Symbiot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, an hour is not enough time to have this discussion. So we hope the conversation continues. You can see on this slide the contact information for our speakers. I just want to personally thank Kat for moderating and leading this conversation. Geoff, Steve, Bridget, as well as Alex, thank you so much for joining us in the conversation and diving deep in this 1 hour time slot that we have. If you have any additional questions, like we mentioned, there will be a recap email sent, and we will also follow through with all of the additional questions that we didn't get to. So we have an opportunity to further the conversation. But in the meantime, as we are wrapping up 2020, can you imagine? It's already almost December 2022. I think I said 2020 earlier. But if you would like to join us on Tuesday, December 13th for the final webinar in this 2022 season, we'll be looking back at 2022 in electric transportation and looking in our crystal ball of what 2023 will bring for us. So we hope you can join us for that conversation. And again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this Tuesday, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much again to our speakers for joining the conversation. Bye now.